All right, the focus of today's lesson is going to be on the forces that shape ecosystems, and and then in the next couple lessons we'll look at how life forms adapt to the different places that they live in. So, at the very beginning of the formation of any area, there's going to be ecological succession. And that's going to be the changes in the ecosystem over time. So they're never going to be static. Even if something was a desert at one point, it could change drastically. It could be a rainforest at a later point in time. And there's a series of predictable changes that occur in a community over time, and it's called ecological succession. So the very first one, if we were to go fly over to Hawaii, there's an active volcano on the Big Island where primary succession so the area on the Big Island where there's a volcano that's currently going, and that's an example of primary succession. So on the Big Island, the volcano is just dumping right into the ocean, and it's creating new land where none existed before. All the Hawaiian Islands are an example. They all started with primary succession. It was a shield volcano that just kept dumping lava and dumping lava until it eventually broke over the surface of the ocean and formed an island. So it's going to happen where on a surface where no soil exists, and it's going to be formed by volcanic eruption. Secondary succession is in a place that's already established, and it's typically on Earth. Most areas would go through secondary succession, where they would go through some sort of overturn. It occurs from a disturbance that does not remove the soil. So some examples would be farmland that's abandoned, if a wildfire comes in and burns down the woods. So here in San Diego, forest fires happen all the time. So forest fire comes in, burns down the forest, and then that forest has to rebuild itself. And that's, scientists typically see that as a natural process, something that most ecosystems are built to handle. They can, all of the old growth forest and trees can get burnt down, and then that forest will kind of rebuild anew. You can separate everything within the ecosystem into biotic and abiotic factors. So this is a review for some of you. Biotic, bio meaning living, so the biotic are the living factors. They're any of the living factors that are going to be influencing the ecosystem, such as plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, etc. Then you've got the abiotic factors, which are the non-living ones, rocks, air, water, and those things that are going to shape your ecosystem. And then you're going to have interactions within the living things for those abiotic resources. It's going to create competition between organisms, different species, and organisms of the same species. So those community interactions, you'll see different lifestyle strategies from some of the organisms in an ecosystem. So for example, a frog. When a frog goes through its life cycle, it has different stages, and it lives in different areas. When it's a tadpole, it lives in the water, and it feeds on one type of food source. And then when it grows into a frog, it can go on land and in the water, and has a different food source. So the adult and the young and the adult stages have different food sources that they feed on. That way it reduces the amount of competition. There's a lot of insects that do that. Ladybugs, they're two different stages, feed on different things, and that way they're not competing for members of their own with other ladybugs for resources. So when we talk about in a given area, you could have the weather, which would be the day-to-day conditions, or the climate. And that's the year after year conditions of temperature and precipitation in the region. the climate's going to be, there's a couple things that are going to affect the climate and cause it to be influenced, and that's heat in the atmosphere, the line of latitude that that area of land is on, or ocean, um, the different wind currents, and ocean currents moving around warm or cold air, the amount of precipitation, and the shape and the elevation of the land are all going to affect the climate of a given area. So even though um, places in Italy are on the same line of latitude, so Rome is about on the same line of latitude as Boston, they've got a totally different climate. Rome is a lot more seasonal and mild because of the Mediterranean and the area that it's in. Um, and the same would happen if you had something at a really high elevation, the same line of latitude. It could be really cold. So if we went back to Hawaii, if you went to the Big Island, you've got the Mauna Loa, and its elevation is so high that at certain times during the winter there's actually snow on the mountain. And so you could be going from snow, and then if you go down to the coastal areas, it'd be around 75 or 80 degrees. Um, a lot in the current news you hear about global warming. If you were to go back 10 years, people talked about the greenhouse effect. So I'm going to start with the greenhouse effect, which is there's a couple different things that are going to trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, and other gases. They trap heat energy from the sun. So normally, heat energy is going to come into the Earth. It's going to hit the Earth's surface, and some of it's going to reflect back and just be lost, and some of it's going to hit into the atmosphere and then be rebounded and kept back on the planet. So some of the energy converted into heat, radiated back into the atmosphere, some does not, passes back out. So what the greenhouse effect is that scientists know for certain that carbon dioxide contributes to the warming, to the greenhouse effect, which causes a warming of the Earth's surface, or not surface, but it causes a warming on Earth. We also know that our current industrial processes and transportation release carbon dioxide at a higher rate than previous times in history. So the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going up. Currently, what's debated by climate scientists that are talking about global warming is the effect that carbon dioxide is going to have on Earth's temperatures. And some scientists predict that it's going to have a drastic effect, and there's going to be polar ice melting and ocean level rising, and there's going to be drastic effects on the surface of the Earth. And some scientists think that it's not going to have as large of an effect as is being predicted. So I want to focus in on the effect of latitude on climate. I talked about it a little bit with my example of Rome and Boston, but Earth's tilted on an axis, so Earth's solar radiation is going to hit Earth at different angles, and there's going to be three main climate zones: polar, temperate, and tropical zones. And the unequal heating of Earth's surface is what's going to drive wind and ocean currents. So some areas are going to be heated more than others at different times. It's going to cause the ocean and the wind to move at in different patterns. So for wind patterns, warm air rises, cool air sinks. And this is what forms wind. Warm air at the equator rises, cool air at the poles sinks, and this creates currents between the equator and the North Pole, or the equator and the South Pole. And wind's going to move that heat energy around. In Hawaii, what we had happen is if you went out surfing early in the morning, you might get wind coming down from the mountains and blowing out towards the water, and it would hold the peaks of the waves up. And then as um, the land heated up with the sunlight, and then we got later into the morning and the early afternoon, it would heat up the land, and so the warm air would be rising, and the wind would come from off the ocean, and it would start to knock the waves down. So the wave conditions would be sloppier later in the day versus earlier in the day. Ocean currents, you're going to have the same thing going on. Cold water near the poles sinks and it flows to the bottom of the ocean, and then water in the warmer areas is going to rise. Um, and then you've got surface water being moved by the wind currents, and then the warm water, mixing in the ocean, and the currents are going to transport all that ocean heat energy. And so also for this, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add. For this is also going to help mix nutrients in the ocean, so it's really important for nutrient cycling in warm areas where there's algae. So those algae blooms are responsible for a lot of the pulling out. They pull out a lot of CO2 out of the air and produce a lot of oxygen. So a lot more than we ever thought. Those algae blooms, they need nutrients for the algae to grow and reproduce, and so that ocean cycling is going to help to feed the algae. And that's the end of the slide for tonight.